Hello, this is Miss Edelin with your first World History lesson over Chapter 1, Section 1. You may want to pause this video to make sure you have a note sheet or a clean piece of notebook paper because the notes for this section are due the next class. Please check your calendar on Schoology or your hard copy in your notebook. Also realize there are questions at the end of this video that you need to submit before midnight the day before class. So let us begin, and we're going to talk about this prehistory, which is the longest time that humans have existed is actually the prehistoric period. We've only been civilized for a short amount of time. And to help us understand our past, of course, many individuals play a part in that, such as historians and geographers, anthropologists, and archaeologists. What you may not have realized is that geography has played a big role. You may not have thought of that in the past, but please make sure you get this definition on your notes. It's the study of people, their environments, and the resources available to them. And of course, geography is really important because depending on where people live would influence how they lived and whether they civilized very quickly. And of course, geographers are sometimes drawing conclusions based on very limited evidence. What we're going to do now is talk about the 5 themes of geography. So in your top bubble, you're going to write the 5 themes of geography, and I know I only have 3 arrows here, but there are 5 themes. And in the bubble to the far left that has 2 more arrows coming from it, you're going to write location. And please go ahead and write location small enough and write the definition. It tells where a place is on Earth. It's very precise. Now, follow the 2 lines down, and in the 2 bubbles, you're going to write latitude and longitude. And in the latitude bubble, you go ahead and define latitude as imaginary lines that divide the Earth into north and south regions, including the equator. That will help you remember it if you put that in there. Okay, and then I have a picture of latitude lines. A student told me once that she remembers that lat is flat, and it looks like those lines are flat there. And here's your longitude definition. These are lines that are imaginary dividing the Earth into east and west regions and includes the prime meridian that determines our time. Now, a picture of the longitude lines makes Earth to me look like a basketball. That's how I remember it. Now here's a globe with them all combined together, and you can see that it does make a precise cross where the latitude and longitude lines are, and we know that latitude and longitude lines are not all drawn on a globe because it would cover the Earth and the water beneath it because there would be so many lines. Our second theme of geography is place. So go into the next bubble to the right, and you're going to write place and put down that it is described. Place is described by the physical features and by the human characteristics of a place. For example, you might put down the city of New York or the state of Tennessee or the Appalachian Mountains. These are all good examples of place. You can see they're more general because they're really a lot bigger than location, which was more precise. The third theme is human-environment interaction. And since humans have been on Earth, we've impacted the environment. For example, the Dust Bowl of the 1930s in the United States is a perfect example of how humans really destroyed the soil so bad that it just blew around for a long time and people couldn't grow crops there. And this has happened throughout man's existence. Movement is just the movement of people, goods, and ideas. The examples you might want to use would be, a really good example would be war. For example, the war in Syria right now, many people are fleeing the area for their lives. Or another example would be the Irish potato famine, where people had to leave because they were starving to death, and a lot of them came to the United States. Our final theme of geography is region, and regions are these large divisions of the world based on location, culture, and politics. For example, the Middle East is a great big region. the South in the United States of America is another example of a region. So let's look at prehistory real quick. The definition for prehistory is the time, again, that before people invented the system of writing. And prehistoric people had no cities, countries, organized government, complex inventions, and so anthropologists, when they study this time period, they're really going to rely on artifacts. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but you might want to write this definition down. Anthropology is the study of the origins and development of people and their societies, and a more specific field of study is archaeology, and that's just a branch of anthropology. And notice here it does talk about the artifacts, which are objects made by human beings, and archaeologists and anthropologists, study those so they can learn about humans during an earlier time period. But they can't do it alone, because analyzing ancient artifacts is really hard. So you're going to put down a couple of examples of other scientists who help anthropologists and archaeologists study man, and those would be chemists and physicists, who measure radioactivity in objects that help determine their age. Geologists can also help date artifacts by studying the rocks that were nearby. And of course, then we've got the life scientists, biologists such as botanists and zoologists, who help study seeds and bones that can tell the archaeologists and anthropologists more about how the early people lived. And then climatologists too can also determine the conditions early people lived in by the amount of pollution and different things like that were in the soil. And finally, we get to historians, and you probably thought historians were the only people who recorded information from the past. But notice here in the definition, historians rely primarily on written evidence. And notice further down, we've only been writing for about the last 5,000 years. So historians cannot go very far back in their work. They rely on anthropologists and archaeologists to fill in that earlier time. Today, historians can use photographs and film and tax records and things of that nature, and they'll evaluate the evidence and try to explain what happened in the past and sometimes predict what might happen in the future as a result. We're going to break down historical evidence into two categories, primary and secondary. And you want to define this on your sheet. Primary sources are sources that were created at about the same time as the event, and often by people who were directly involved in the event. And then you've got your examples right here: diaries, letters, speeches, television reports, etc. As opposed to secondary sources, which were usually created after the event and sometimes by people not even involved in the event. Historians would be this way when they write historic books or textbooks, encyclopedias, and so on. We do need to know some other terms to help us study history this year, and BC and AD are two terms we're going to use, and we're going to look at a timeline in just a minute. BC does mean before Christ, so you can see that the timeline is based on the birth of Christ. AD means Anno Domini, or in the year of our Lord. But because many people on this earth today are not Christian, they're all different kinds of religions, but they're not Christian, you will find a lot of text use the term BCE and CE. BCE means before Common Era, and CE means Common Era. So make sure you know that, because that when you take tests later on, they're going to use the BCE and the CE. All right, now let's look at this timeline real quick, and we'll notice that our BC's on this side and AD is over here, and you've got your 0 right in the middle. Notice that in the BC time period, we're going to count backwards, like a rocket ship taking off, 10, 9, 8, so on. And with the AD, we're going to count forward like a regular, positive numbers, 1, 2, 3. And this section of the timeline from 0 to 99 AD is the 1st century. And from 100 to 199 is the 2nd century. Now, if you look backwards, the same is true. From the year 99 down to 0 is the 1st century BC. From 199 down to 100 is the 2nd century BC. All right, so let's look at some little examples. And if you look at the timeline up above, you can see if the 1st century BC again refers to the years 99 to 0. And one way to help yourself remember is we live in the 21st century AD or CE, and the years are the 2000s. So that might help you, okay? So I want you to look at the rest of this practice time, these practice problems I'm going to give you. I want you to work on them and see if you can solve them on your own. And we'll talk about them next time in class, all right? And you just need to answer the following questions on your note sheet, okay? Use the timeline to help you. If you have trouble, again, we're going to talk about it in class. I'll see you in class.